The lights in the banquet hall were warm, golden, flattering, just like everything about this night was supposed to be. Mary had called it a casual dinner with some friends returning from abroad. She said they were close. She said, "Please come, David," with that smile she knew always disarmed him. So he came. He wore the charcoal blazer she said made him look dangerously decent. He even brought the red wine she liked, imported, expensive, but not flashy. He hadn't even sat for 10 minutes before he realized he'd walked straight into a performance. At the center of the room, laughing softly and sipping his champagne, stood George. Same perfect posture, same light gray coat with the scarf tucked in just so. The same George Mary used to bring up in stories like he was nothing. "We dated a long time ago," she'd once said. "He went abroad, it didn't work out, ancient history." Ancient history, my ass, David thought. From the second George walked in, Mary's hand slipped out of his. She didn't even notice. He did. He noticed how her eyes followed George across the room, how her body turned toward him slightly, unconsciously. And when George greeted him, "You must be David, I've heard a lot about you," David knew. She'd never stopped talking to him. The dinner was polite, for a while. People gossiped about flights and Europe and property prices. George cracked jokes that made everyone laugh a little too hard. David stayed quiet, listening, memorizing every smirk, every sideways glance. Then Sophia, the loudest of Mary's girlfriends, leaned across the table with a teasing grin. "All right, enough of this. Mary, is there anyone here you like?" There was a ripple of playful gasps. All eyes turned to her, even David. Mary didn't laugh. She smiled lightly, bit her lip, tilted her head, then said, "Yes." The table erupted. Who is it?" Sophia laughed. "Is it someone new, or someone ni old?" David turned to her, waiting. Maybe, just maybe, she'd say his name. Maybe she'd reach for his hand. But her eyes were already on George. The room fell into slow silence as the realization bloomed like blood in water. Some laughed it off awkwardly, some didn't know where to look. George blinked, then smiled faintly and looked down at his glass like he was embarrassed. David just stared. Not at George, not at the others. Just at Mary. She refused to meet his eyes. The weight of it all collapsed in a single moment. The whispers, the distance, the messages she wouldn't let him see, the business trips that got extended for no reason. The little photo she once brushed off as an old memory still tucked behind her phone case. David stood. The chair scraped loudly against the marble floor, breaking the silence. He looked straight at her, no anger in his eyes, just clarity and finality. "You're filth, Mary, just like your taste in men." She blinked, lips parting slightly. And then everything shattered. George froze. Sophia gasped. Someone dropped a fork. The manager turned his head. David didn't wait. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and placed it on the table. He pressed play. Mary's voice filled the room. A voice note, soft, intimate, recorded 2 nights ago. "He still texts me. I can't ignore him, okay? George was my first real love, but David's just stable." The room exploded into murmurs. David looked at George. "Tell me, was it worth being her safety net for 3 years just to be her backup again?" George said nothing. David turned and walked out. He didn't slam the door. He didn't need to. The silence left behind did it for him. They met in the kind of place where people didn't usually fall in love, under fluorescent lights, in a cold marble lobby filled with paperwork, time cards and the sterile scent of floor polish. David had just started at Linford Corp, working under a false surname. No one knew his real background, that was the point. He wore plain shirts, always pressed but never flashy. He took the subway to work, ate cafeteria food, declined every after-work invitation. He never corrected anyone when they assumed he was just another mid-level hire trying to climb his way up. That's when Mary appeared. She worked in business development, confident, efficient, always smiling. But it was a careful smile, crafted with precision. She had the kind of face people remembered, not because of its beauty, but because of how perfectly it stayed composed, even when annoyed, even when lying. David noticed her the way a soldier notices a slight echo out of place in a familiar corridor, quietly, but completely. She was the first one to approach him. "You always eat alone," she said one afternoon, standing next to his table with a paper tray in her hands. That's kind of sad, you know. He looked up slowly. Sad or peaceful? Depends on who you ask, she smiled, sliding into the seat across from him. I'm Mary. He nodded. David. The days that followed unfolded like something out of a slow-burning drama. A lunch here, a shared elevator ride there, a project she offered to help with, a late meeting where she brought coffee, just because. She asked about his hometown. He gave vague answers. She asked about family. He lied. What he didn't say was that his father was CEO of the Wang Group, a name that carried weight across cities, that he had grown up in silence, raised by relatives who barely wanted him. That he had watched his mother die from a hospital bed while his father signed deals across the GEO. He didn't say he'd built his entire adulthood on escaping that world. Mary didn't know any of that, or maybe she did. A few months into dating, she came over to his apartment and stared at his watch collection. Subtle, tasteful, but not normal for someone in his supposed income bracket. This one's a Grand Seiko, she said, picking it up. You sure you're not some hidden trust fund kid? He smirked. I just save better than most. She laughed. That was the thing about Mary, she never asked too many questions. And David mistook that for love. She said she liked his calm energy, that he made her feel safe, that he was different from the guys she used to date. And he believed it. He even introduced her to Sarah, his only true friend from childhood. Sarah worked in private legal affairs, mostly anonymous contract work for major corporations. She and David had grown up in the same province. She was the one who knew about his mother's accident, the accusations from his aunt, the beatings he hid with long sleeves. Sarah had always protected him, even when it meant getting bruised in his place. So when Mary met Sarah, she smiled a little too hard, complimented her clothes a little too quickly. She sensed something, a closeness she didn't have with David. And Sarah, she saw everything, the way Mary clung to David's arm like a handbag, the way her eyes lit up not when he spoke, but when others looked at him. Later, Sarah pulled David aside. She's not what you think. David frowned. She's better than the others. Sarah shook her head. She's just smarter than the others, that doesn't mean she's loyal. He didn't listen. He should have. What no one at Linford Corp knew was that David could have owned half the company if he wanted. He'd bought 20% of its shares quietly through a holding firm years ago when he was still studying business overseas. He wasn't just working there. He was watching, learning, gathering. But he never pulled rank, never used his name. Because he didn't want a woman who loved David Wang, son of an empire. He wanted someone who would love David, the man who rode the subway, drank cheap coffee, and walked home in the rain. Mary seemed like that woman. Until George came back, until her smile slipped, her eyes shifted, her fingers let go of his. It was Sarah who spotted the change first. She's pulling away, she said flatly, the night before the banquet. She's just stressed, David replied. Sarah narrowed her eyes. You've known me 15 years, have I ever been wrong about people? He looked at her, silent, then turned away. You haven't snapped yet, Sarah said, but I know you, David. If she crosses you, if she lies to you, they won't survive it. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because Sarah was right. David didn't explode. He calculated. He waited. Because when he did move, it would be the kind of blow that none of them would get up from. The ride home after the banquet was silent. Mary sat beside David in the car, scrolling her phone with forced calm, occasionally glancing out the window. Her fingers trembled slightly, not out of guilt, David suspected, but calculation. She hadn't expected him to react like that. Are you mad? She asked finally, not looking at him. David didn't answer. She continued, softer now. It was just a joke, David. I was caught off guard. I didn't mean anything by it. His voice was quiet but sharp. You looked directly at him when you said yes. Mary's lips pressed together. She didn't deny it. Just whispered, don't make this a big deal. He didn't respond. He was already making it a big deal, internally. Back at his apartment, while Mary was in the shower, David sat on the edge of his bed, scrolling through George's profile. It was public, of course it was. People like George wanted to be seen. There was a photo taken at the edge of a cliff, the sea behind him, waves crashing mid-frame. A woman's silhouette visible in the corner, back turned, hair dancing in the wind. David opened Mary's Moments feed. Buried 3 months back, there it was. Same sea, same cliff, same sky. Her caption had read, "Sometimes it's not about the destination, but who you go with." She had told him it was a solo trip. He stared at the 2 photos, eyes flicking back and forth between them. That wasn't coincidence, that wasn't just a friend, that was history preserved in pixels. He closed the phone and set it down. The next morning, Sarah called. "You still think she's loyal?" David didn't reply. "I looked into George's accounts," she continued. "He didn't just come back, he transferred here 5 months ago. That lines up with her sudden business trips to nearby provinces. You still want to play dumb?" "She hasn't admitted anything," David said coldly. Sarah exhaled sharply. "She won't, because she is waiting for you to explode first so she can play the victim. You know this game, David." He clenched his jaw. "I'm not doing anything until I'm sure." "You are sure, you just don't want to be." He hung up. Later that night, Mary suggested they meet the group again. "Just a small get-together," she said casually. "It'll be good to clear the air. George will be there, but I want you there too, so it doesn't look weird." David raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't look weird to who?" Mary's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You're overthinking again." They arrived late. The private lounge was dimly lit, voices soft and drunk. George was already there, coat off, shirt slightly unbuttoned, cheeks flushed from wine. He stood when they entered. "David, good to see you again." David nodded, ignoring the extended handshake. Mary sat beside George. David took a seat across the table. As the night wore on, the air grew warmer, messier. They played games, dares, drank too much. Mary kept losing. Then came the question, if you could undo one relationship in your life, which would it be? Mary smiled, tipsy, and answered too quickly. "I don't believe in undoing anything." But she didn't look at David. She looked at George. David said nothing. George poured her a glass of wine. Mary hesitated, glanced at David, then took the glass. An hour later, George slumped back in his chair, eyes red, his voice slurring slightly. "I shouldn't have drunk this much," he mumbled. "My skin's acting up, damn allergies." Mary snapped to attention. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" He shrugged. "Didn't want to ruin the mood." "You know you're allergic, George." She turned to the group. "I'll take him home." David stiffened. "I mean, just to get him into a cab, of course," she added quickly, standing. "He's not well." David stood too. "I'll call a driver." But George grabbed Mary's arm. "No need, she knows my place, it's close." David looked at her. She didn't meet his eyes. Just said softly, "It's fine, David, he needs help." David's voice was low. "You sure you want to do that?" Mary touched his wrist. "Don't make it more than it is. I'll come back after." He didn't say another word. He stepped aside as they walked past. But as George passed him, he smirked, not cocky, not loud, just a tiny, sideways pull of the lips. David saw it. So did Sarah, who stood quietly near the door, unnoticed by the others. She had been watching the whole time, arms folded, silent. As Mary and George disappeared down the hallway, Sarah walked up beside David. "You still needed proof?" David's eyes didn't leave the door. "Now I have it," he said. David didn't go home that night. He wandered the streets instead, letting the city lights blur through his windshield as the rain smeared across the glass. His phone buzzed, another message from Mary. "He just needed help. I couldn't ignore someone in danger, David. You'd do the same, right?" He put the phone face down on the passenger seat. It buzzed again. "You're misunderstanding everything. I'll explain when I see you." The lies were gentle now, coated in sugar, soft words typed by shaking hands, but the betrayal had already rooted itself too deep. David drove aimlessly, finally stopping in an empty parking lot. For a while, he just sat there, forehead against the steering wheel, breathing slowly, and then, the memories began clawing back. Not of Mary, of a different woman, a softer voice, a real smile, his mother. He was 9 when she packed his clothes into a thin cloth bag and knelt in front of him, hands trembling. "Your father needs me to help run the new business. I'll come back soon, okay?" She didn't. David was sent to live with his father's older brother in a dusty rural town where children learned hunger before they learned math. His aunt resented every breath he took. "You're just here because no one else wants you," she'd sneer. "Don't act like you're anything special." He washed dishes taller than himself, folded laundry for cousins who kicked him under the table. He used to sneak leftover rice when no one was looking, and once got caught eating a stale bun. They said he stole it. They made him kneel in the courtyard for hours in the cold, bare knees on gravel. He remembered the neighbors walking past, whispering, the way the stray dogs stared, how his stomach growled louder than his voice ever did. He never cried. Even back then, David had learned that tears were useless. What he did instead was watch, learn, endure, build something within that no one could touch. At school, the other kids mocked his accent, his clothes, his silence. A teacher once gave him detention for being too cold. He scored first in class every term, but no one congratulated him. When he was 12, he punched the son of the village chief for spitting on his books. They called his father. Instead of defending him, his father said, "You're embarrassing us, don't make trouble." That night, David locked himself in a storeroom behind the school. He stared at the rusted shelves and told himself, "One day, I'll never need anyone again." Now, sitting in his car, rain beating against the windshield, he whispered that line aloud. He meant it more than ever. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a different name. "Sarah. Where are you? Come to my place, I made tea." David didn't reply. But 10 minutes later, he knocked on her door. Sarah opened it silently. Her hair was tied up. She wore an oversized hoodie and no makeup. He stepped in, wet from the rain. She handed him a towel. "Don't talk," she said softly. "Just sit." He sat. The tea was bitter and hot. It burned his tongue slightly, on purpose. Sarah always did that. Said pain reminded you you were still human. She didn't ask what happened. She just waited. After a while, David finally said, "I'm a joke." Sarah didn't respond. She said she loved me, said I was safe, said he was just the past. But the truth is... He stopped himself, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I was just a placeholder until the past walked back in." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "You were never safe to her," she said quietly. "You were invisible, and she thought she could use you without consequences." David looked up. "Why didn't I see it sooner?" Sarah leaned back. "Because part of you wanted it to be real. You wanted one thing in your life to be simple, normal." He exhaled sharply, like someone cracking a after holding their breath too long. "I feel like I'm going to explode." Sarah nodded. "Then explode. Just make sure it's aimed at the right targets." The next morning at work, things got worse. George walked into the office like he'd been born there. "Didn't know we'd be colleagues," he said with a smug grin. "Guess fate likes to mess with us both." David stared at him flatly. "Didn't know cockroaches knew how to operate a keyboard." George laughed like it was a compliment. Mary had recommended him for a position. Said he was talented, experienced abroad, and emotionally mature. He was none of those things. He made small talk loudly, dropped David's name into meetings with sarcastic edge. Once, during a team lunch, he said, "David's the kind of guy who'd make a great husband, quiet, predictable, always in bed by 10. The table laughed. David didn't. He was watching, calculating. George didn't know who he was really messing with. Later that week, Mary messaged again. "You haven't talked to me in days. I feel like you're punishing me." "He's just a friend, David. Please trust me. Please let this go." David deleted the message without reading the rest. The slow burn inside him had turned into something darker now, cold, steady, focused. Sarah called him that night. "Have you decided what to do?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "I'm going to tear down their little fantasy, piece by piece." Sarah's voice was calm. "Do you want help?" "No." Pause, then, softer. "But I want you close by." Sarah smiled on the other end. "Always." David stared out his window into the city skyline. They thought they were clever. They thought they'd played him. But David was done being quiet. It started with whispers, sudden, casual, calculated. "Isn't David dating that Mary girl? Didn't he come from some rural town? I heard he used fake credentials to get hired. I think he's got debt. Or a sugar mommy." David noticed the shift, eyes lingering too long. Colleagues suddenly quieting when he walked by, comments about his living standards dropping into conversations like stray bullets. Then it hit the company's internal board: beware of this man, David L. Fake luxury, fake charm, real danger. It came with blurry photos: David stepping out of a black car, entering a luxury watch boutique, standing beside a woman who looked vaguely like someone's sponsor fantasy. The woman was Sarah. Underneath the post was a comment thread stretching dozens of replies long, most anonymous, all venomous. "Uses women for money. Heard he squats in rich girls' condos. Doesn't even have a real family background, complete fraud." And in the middle of it all, David spotted the source: a dummy account created just a week ago using an overseas IP, but with digital fingerprints identical to George's online habits. He didn't even flinch. He forwarded the link to Sarah. One line only. "Run the trace, quietly." 15 minutes later, she called. He tried to use a VPN, but the fool synced it with his WeChat, logged into the same device with his real name 3 days ago. "The IP's been locked." David's voice was calm. "Get me everything, metadata, login logs, timestamps. I want a package thick enough to slap his face without touching him." Sarah smiled through the phone. Already on it. He wasn't going to confront George, not yet. George wanted him to break first, to lose his temper, to look like the savage. Instead, David waited. He began visiting places George frequented: pubs, parking lots, printing shops, the people George had borrowed money from, the girl he'd breed. Fly dated abroad, now back in the city and working night shifts at a convenience store. One by one, David started pulling the threads. He hired a small agency through Sarah's legal network. Not corporate, not flashy. Just 3 guys who were very good at digging digital graves. Within a week, they delivered a full dossier. George had lied about his degree. The foreign university had no such record. George owed over 300,000 yuan overseas. A case was still open in another jurisdiction under a pseudonym. George had once been accused of harassing a classmate, but the complaint was withdrawn mysteriously. David didn't publish anything. Not yet. Instead, he made one small move. He created a throwaway blog and posted an article: "When Manipulation Looks Like Love, a deep dive into emotional blackmail in corporate circles." He included quotes, anonymous screenshots, a voice note from Mary, months ago, saying, "George always said he'd come back and fix everything. He made me promise not to tell anyone we kept talking. I had to lie to David, but it's not like he needs me the way George does." He watched the post crawl across platforms. People speculated, some guessed, some didn't, but the effect was immediate. George's aura of respectability cracked. HR began quietly reviewing his application. Mary started calling again. "I'm so confused, I feel like someone's targeting us." "David, please, if this is you, can we just talk?" He didn't answer. She'd had her chance. What she didn't know was that David never planned to stay hidden forever. His name, David Wang, wasn't something he threw around, but soon, they'd remember it, every last one of them. Because once the CEO of Linford Corp returned from his overseas conference, he'd walk into the boardroom and publicly shake David's hand. And when that happened, everyone would know that the man they mocked owned 22% of the company. That the woman they ridiculed as his sponsor was Sarah Lian, legal executive and former investment partner in Wang Group. That David never once lied, he simply waited for their lies to bury themselves. He stood in front of the mirror the night before the board meeting, adjusted his cufflinks, pressed his collar flat. Not because he cared about appearances, but because he understood war. And tomorrow, the war would begin. Mary texted again. This time it was different, less pleading, more strategic. "Let's not keep hurting each other, the girls and I. We want to apologize properly. One dinner, then we all go our separate ways." David read the message slowly, his expression unreadable. He looked at Sarah across the room, seated on his couch, flipping through case files. "She's making her move," he said. Sarah didn't look up. "Then it's time for you to make yours." David replied with one word: accepted. They chose a sleek little private room in a mid-tier restaurant, one that was discreet but still flashy enough to look like they were above it all. Mary was already there, seated at the center, George beside her, smug as ever. Sophia, Alicia and Mira, the trio of passive-aggressive approval. David arrived 15 minutes late, on purpose, in silence. He didn't bring Sarah. He didn't need backup anymore. He stepped inside, wearing a crisp black suit that clung to his figure like armor. His watch gleamed under the light. He looked like someone important, finally. Mary stood when she saw him. David. He held up a hand. No need for speeches. He took the seat nearest the door and crossed his arms. Well? He asked, voice calm. Let's hear the performance. Mary shifted awkwardly. I shouldn't have lied to you. I hurt you, and I accept that. But everything that's happened after, with the blog posts and the rumors. You're trying to say I started it? David asked softly. She faltered. I'm just saying, things got out of hand. Sophia leaned forward. We're all here to make peace. That's what mature people do. David smiled faintly. Is that what you tell yourself when you're helping your best friend cheat? Alicia scoffed. You really haven't changed, always making drama. David's smile didn't falter. You know what's funny? He stood up slowly. You all thought I'd show up to be lectured, but I didn't come here to listen. He turned, walked to the wall and reached up. In one swift motion, he pulled down the security camera blinders he had installed earlier. The room went still. Let's talk somewhere more private, he said. The alley outside should do. They exchanged confused glances, unsure whether he was joking. But something in David's tone left no room for questions. The alley behind the restaurant was quiet, dimly lit, no passers-by. David walked in first, his footsteps echoing. Then came Mary, George, and the trio, one by one, hesitant, uneasy. When they were all there, David turned around. Do you know what poetic justice looks like? He asked. Smack. His hand came down hard across Mary's cheek, the sound sharp, clean, final. You play innocent, but you're just opportunistic filth, he said. I hope you get everything you want, and choke on it. Mary staggered back, hand on her face, too stunned to speak. He turned to George. I should have known you'd crawl back out of the sewer, but tell me, what's it like knowing the woman you love still lies better than you do? Then, another slap. George reeled, mouth bleeding slightly. You messed with the wrong man, and now your resume's been retracted, your offer rescinded, and your reputation, gone. David stepped past him, turned to Sophia. Let me guess, he said. You just wanted your friend to be happy, right? That's why you trashed me behind my back. That's why you spread rumors. That's why you ran your mouth like a broken faucet. He raised a hand. Sophia flinched, but the blow didn't land. Instead, he held out a folder. Inside this envelope are screenshots of every time you lied about your husband's finances to your friend group, every time you photoshopped your receipts, every time you begged your boss for extra shifts while pretending to be rich online. Her face drained of color. You'll be getting an email from your HR department soon, David said casually. Might want to update your resume. To Alicia, he just sneered. You said I was poor, that I didn't deserve someone like Mary. He leaned closer. Tell your husband what you've been doing at the gym every Thursday with your trainer. I'm sure he'll be very interested. Alicia lunged at him, nails out. He stepped aside smoothly, letting her stumble into the wall. Not your type, he said. I have standards. Mira trembled. I didn't say anything. You didn't need to, David interrupted. You were the quiet supporter, the kind who smiles while stabbing backs. You're just as pathetic as the rest of them. And then, silence. David stood tall in the middle of the alley, breathing slow and steady. Mary wiped her mouth, voice shaking. What do you want from us? I wanted you to see yourselves, David said, for who you really are. You preyed on someone you thought was powerless, but I'm not the man I was when I met you. He stepped forward. You humiliated me in public, so I returned the favor. From the shadows, a black car pulled up. The back door opened. Sarah stepped out, holding a file and a phone. The police are on their way, she said simply. We traced the cyber defamation posts. George's name is on half of them. Mary's apartment Wi-Fi handled the other half. George's knees gave. You wouldn't. I already did. Sarah handed him the folder. Consider this your preview of the charges. Mary screamed, You're insane. You'll regret this. David just turned away. You don't even exist to me anymore. The aftermath wasn't dramatic. It was clinical. George was terminated by Linford Corp. Quietly, no severance, no reference. Mary's name circulated quietly among HR circles. Not worth the risk, they said. Too messy. Sophia and Alicia both lost their jobs after separate scandals broke. Ira faded from social media, deleting every post within a week. David? He walked into the next shareholder meeting flanked by Sarah and the CEO. When his name was called, people applauded. He never once looked back. The Wang estate sat at the edge of the city, tucked behind steel gates and sculpted hedges. David hadn't been back in years, not since he left without a word, without asking for money, blessings, or apologies. Now, after everything, he stood at the same threshold again. The butler opened the door with quiet recognition. Master David, he's expecting you. His father sat alone in the study, the fire burning low behind him. The old man had aged, his hair thinner, face more lined, but his posture was still straight, as if he refused to yield to time, even now. He didn't stand when David entered, just looked up slowly. You've been busy, he said. David didn't answer. He walked in, took the seat across from him. There was silence for a while. Then his father sighed. You handled it, precisely, ruthlessly, like a Wang. I handled it like someone who had no choice. I should have given you better tools, so you didn't have to learn that kind of fire alone. David folded his hands. You gave me everything but presence. His father nodded, painfully. And I regret that, every day. I can't take it back. But I see what it's made you. There was a tremble in the old man's voice now. I've built empires, David, but I've failed to build a home. I thought sending money, arranging things from afar, was enough. It wasn't. David looked down. The hurt was still raw, but the fire had dimmed. His father reached across the table. I don't expect forgiveness. Just, let me be part of your life now, even if just a piece of it. David didn't take his hand, but he didn't walk away either, and for now, that was enough. Mary waited outside David's building 3 days later. She looked nothing like the girl who used to spin on her heels and laugh like the world owed her attention. Now she stood still, pale, a paper bag of pastries in her hand. He didn't speak when he saw her. I just wanted to tell. LK, she said quickly. Not about us. I know that's over. I know I messed everything up. David raised an eyebrow. She swallowed. I didn't know how far you'd go. Then you never knew me at all. She looked down. George's family. They're being attacked online. His parents are getting calls from schools, from neighbors. You leaked everything, didn't you? David didn't flinch. No, I just mailed the truth. She looked up, voice rising. His mother's heart isn't good. This could kill her. David took a slow step forward. So was mine, he said. She died on the way to a meeting your kind said was more important than me. I was 9. Mary blinked rapidly. I didn't know that. You didn't want to know. David, please, can we just try again? His phone buzzed in his pocket. A voice message. He opened it. Her voice. If I could go back, I'd choose you. I was scared. I thought George loved me more, but I was wrong. You protected me more than anyone. Please, just give me a chance to be the woman you deserve. He didn't listen to the rest, deleted, without a word, without hesitation. Mary's lips parted, eyes trembling. David turned his back to her and walked away. Later that evening, he sat on the rooftop of Sarah's building, the city glittering below them like 1,000 broken promises. She handed him a glass of something warm. You did it, she said. I didn't win, David replied quietly. I just stopped losing. Sarah looked at him. You're not a monster. He didn't speak. You're just someone who finally decided to fight back. David let the silence hold between them. A breeze passed, gentle, cleansing. Sarah tucked her legs beneath her and said softly, Do you remember when you told me, back in high school, that you didn't need anyone waiting for you? He nodded faintly. Well, she smiled, I waited anyway. He looked at her. She held his gaze, steady, kind, familiar. Then, for the first time in weeks, David exhaled without tension in his chest. His phone buzzed again, another message, from Mary. He didn't open it. He handed the phone to Sarah and said, "Delete it." She did. He looked out at the city, then back at her. "Let's go home," he said. "This city's not big enough for liars anymore." Sarah smiled. "And what about monsters?" David smirked. "They sleep fine when the war's over." They stood, walking back toward the stairwell. Behind them, the skyline continued to shine, but it no longer shimmered with the same menace. It was just a city again. He would never be the boy who knelt on gravel anymore. He would never beg anyone to stay. He would never silence himself just to be tolerated. He was David Wang, and he had burned the bridge while everyone was still standing on it.